Today, we are putting an end to content theft on every social media platform, but especially TikTok, where, for a recent example, seemingly one person has been allowed to steal and upload hundreds of videos from me and other fellow tech creators, racking up millions of views, while in my case, TikTok just let takedown notices go unanswered for months. And this is nothing new. I found plenty of stories of TikTok doing this to others. Well, I say no more. Well, that's kind of a tall order, Joe. How do you plan to do that? Well, this entire video is basically stuff big social media companies hope you don't find out, and I go in depth into both what you can do as a viewer and what creators can do themselves. For example, there were 2 TikTok accounts, clearly from the same person, ripping my videos verbatim from YouTube and re-uploading the day after I posted. One of them even was using my picture and name for a while, but I guess changed it because it thought it would get banned sooner. And for over 2 months of me sending TikTok takedown notices, which went unanswered, even one sent by my lawyer, the accounts stayed up. Until that is, I figured out a way to actually get TikTok's attention and finally got the 2 accounts totally obliterated. And this way takes less than a month. Obviously that's longer than I wanted though, and of course the thief didn't give up, and about a week ago, just days after the other accounts were banned, he started uploading my stuff on another account he had that was even stealing other creators' videos. He was probably thinking that it would take TikTok another 2 months to ban that account, and he could just monetize it in the meantime as usual. But I didn't give up either, and you can see that that account is actually already banned. You see, while making this video, actually, I figured out a second, even faster, nuclear option which can apparently motivate TikTok to act with lightning speed, literally within 1 day in my case. But here's the beauty of what I'm going to show you. It doesn't matter if it takes even a month for any additional new accounts to be banned, because I've got a step-by-step plan to ensure they'll always get banned before any of their earnings are finalized. So no matter how many stolen views they get in the meantime, they won't get paid. Rinse and repeat that on any new accounts they try to start up, and after a couple times, they'll probably realize that it's just a waste of time to steal from you. But again, you as a viewer can also help with the plan to buy more time, which I'll get to in a second. So if you ever do come across someone impersonating a creator you watch, send them this video, and that is how we're gonna put an end to these buffoons for good. Now, do not be intimidated by the length of this video. Every part isn't meant for every person. First, I'll go over what anyone watching can do right now. Then I'll start getting into what creators can do, like a more detailed breakdown of the strategy I just talked about. I also go over some really important info that no one ever really talks about when it comes to DMCA takedowns. That's a major tool you have in all this, so you really need to understand it well. Then I have a couple whole sections just about how to deal with TikTok, because they are usually the slowest, but again, there are ways to deal with them. Then I have another even more detailed section with ideas for crafting a 4D chess level DMCA takedown without even necessarily having to reveal your personal info and named the thief. And finally, I even have a section probably only of interest to lawyers. As a creator and tech enthusiast, I have some experience and insights into how these platforms operate that I think might be interesting or good to know. And so let's get started. And by the way, I got a haircut in the middle of making this video, so my hair might magically grow at some points. Alright, so what can you do personally if you see a thief stealing from a creator you watch? Well, if it's any other platform besides TikTok, simply letting the creator know should suffice, since those platforms are pretty good at honoring takedowns. But TikTok requires some extra effort, and there are 2 things that you can do mainly. First of all is reporting them in a specific way. Take this fake account, for example, pretending to be this creator, Lyron Segev, if I'm pronouncing that right, whose real TikTok account has the handle The Techie Guy. Now, you can first try going to the account, then at least in the app, you click the share button on the profile, which will reveal the report option, and then you click that. Report account, pretending to be someone, celebrity, and then try typing in that person's actual account name or handle. Anyway, if the name shows up, fine, do that, select it and report it as impersonation. If the real person's name doesn't come up and let you select it in the app when you search for it, try instead going to the desktop version of TikTok and reporting the account the same way through that. Apparently that one will show all users, at least in my experience, but I think for some reason the app has some kind of follower threshold or something. Now, unfortunately, TikTok, in any case, apparently doesn't really give a crap and probably won't even remove a blatantly obvious impersonator from one report, at least from what I've seen. But there is a much higher chance if there's more reports from other users. So yes, if you can report all of these accounts, it would be greatly appreciated. Next, another thing you can do to help is if you see any impersonating accounts or stolen videos, leave a comment on that video letting viewers know the original source, who actually made it, and that this isn't that creator's account. This lets viewers know where to find the actual content and makes it less likely that people will follow the thief, which will be really important for later to buy the creator time to get the account banned before the account can monetize, since there is a follower threshold. I'll get to that later. But be careful about leaving super negative comments because the thief might just delete it, or the platform's AI might hide really negative comments. So you want it to actually be shown. Just remember, you can't stop any viewers from seeing the video at that point, but if they see your comment, it might make people less likely to like the video or follow simply if they know that the account isn't the actual creator. So just be neutral about it. All right, now for creators, let's go over my strategy for truly ending impersonators and content thieves. This mostly applies in the case of someone who repeatedly steals your content, even if they create new accounts after they've been banned. I think you almost have to take a practical, capitalistic approach and make it not worth their time to steal the content in the first place. Now, if we start from the beginning, why do they steal the content? Obviously, to monetize it. The trouble is, especially with TikTok, who is so slow, by the time that they get around to taking down the videos, they may have already racked up a ton of views. But here's the thing. It's not like those views are instantly converted into dollars and deposited into their bank account. Consider what the entire content theft timeline looks like. And yes, this is all extremely relevant to my point. One is the thief creates a new account on YouTube, TikTok, or whatever, and starts uploading your content. Two, they have to wait and reach a performance threshold to be eligible for whatever monetization program, and that could take days or even weeks. Three, they then have to apply for the monetization program and wait to be accepted, which probably will take another few days. And remember, up until this point, they have not made any money yet. Four is when they finally start monetizing. Now, even if you aren't able to get the content taken down before they start monetizing, remember that the payouts are not instant. They've just been accruing estimated earnings. On YouTube, your earnings are finalized and sent to AdSense between the 7th and 12th of the following month. On TikTok, payouts are finalized and paid on the 15th of the following month. And here's the key. On both TikTok and YouTube, and probably most platforms, if you get banned before the earnings are finalized, you lose it all. So if you can consistently get the thief accounts terminated for repeat infringement within that window before the first payment, it doesn't matter how many views they get or how many new accounts they create. If this works, they never get paid a dime. As for how to get the videos taken down, I'll go over that later when I talk about DMCA takedown notices. Anyway, for YouTube, who is really fast with takedowns, even 7 days is plenty of time. But TikTok is notoriously slow and are known to sometimes take many weeks or months to take down content. And this is nothing new. I found plenty of stories of TikTok doing this to others. And you might think, well, how can that be legal? Well, courts have generally found 5 to 14 days to be acceptable, so I'll just leave it at that. But I think they probably usually don't care because of a section in their terms of service that prevents you from suing them without going through what they call an informal dispute resolution process. And that is the first of just 2 ways that I'm aware of to actually get their attention. Now, it is slower than the nuclear option I'll discuss, which is basically to have your lawyer send something like a cease and desist letter, but it is probably easier and it's also free. I found that with the informal dispute process, it takes them about 30 days to act, but that's still way faster than what I was waiting otherwise. And it still should be enough to make sure that the thief never gets paid, or in a worst case, they might just get a week or so of revenue in the first month, depending on when things happen initially, but as long as their account gets nuked anytime in the next 45 days after that, they won't get any more. And yes, a large portion of this video is specifically about dealing with TikTok because they are so difficult to get to act. As for finding the thieves' new or existing accounts, assuming they upload regularly, what you can do is just first try searching for your username and then filtering within the last week or month. Oh, and be sure to search while logged out or on a different account in case they blocked you so that you wouldn't find them. If you already know about one of their accounts, you can look for patterns on that to search for, like check to see if they use any frequent but unusual or less common hashtags in a bunch of the videos they upload, so you could search for that. For this thief, I noticed that they seem to often set the TikTok description to either the first line of the YouTube video description, or sometimes they even just copy and paste one of the top YouTube comments and use that. For the text above the video, they either seem to use the video title itself, or again, recently they've also been just copying and pasting top comments and using that. So there's a lot you can try. And it seems that you can search in quotes and that does make a difference. All right, next, importantly, we need to talk about DMCA takedowns. And hold on, even if you already know generally what a DMCA takedown notice is, there are critical little details and nuances that you will want to understand. Realize though that I'm not a lawyer, none of this is legal advice, it's just my understanding. First of all, what exactly is a DMCA notice and its purpose? It's simply a predefined way to make a legal statement notifying a company that there is content on their platform that you believe is infringing on your copyrights. And in this case, you're called the claimant. So if you see that term comes up, that's you when submitting a takedown. Importantly though, a DMCA takedown is not an automatic, you have to delete this letter. The law does not say if you get a DMCA notice, you are required to remove the content no matter what. What the law actually says, and I'm paraphrasing, is basically if a platform gets one of these notices about some infringing user-uploaded content and then takes down that content quickly, you can't sue the platform for that infringement, only the actual user who uploaded it. This is known as safe harbor. In other words, if a platform gets a DMCA notice and they think that the content is not actually infringing, technically they can just choose to ignore the notice. However, this would open them up to be sued for copyright infringement, just like the person who uploaded it. But the claimant would still need to win that case. And some platforms like YouTube have actually done this, where they explicitly say, yeah, we think this is fair use and we're not going to take it down. As for how long a company has to remove the content, the law just says it must be expeditious, which courts have generally found to be roughly 5 to 14 days, but ultimately it's up to the court on a case-by-case basis. I will point out though that none of this affects your ability to sue the actual person who uploaded the infringing content. Even if the platform removes it after a takedown, you can still sue them. Heck, you can even sue the person without filing a takedown, assuming you know who they are. Otherwise, you can file a so-called DMCA subpoena to force the platform to hand over info about that user, so you can sue them. A DMCA subpoena does need to go through the courts though. You can't just be going and getting users' info willy-nilly. The reason I want to explain all this is so you can understand that the only things these companies are afraid of is being sued. They can ignore DMCA notices all day, every day, with no consequences if nobody ever bothers to sue them. And this is especially critical when it comes to TikTok, because if you agree to their terms of service, they know you can't sue them without first going through their informal dispute resolution process. You're no threat. You really should be willing to enforce your rights in court if necessary, though. It's not as scary as it sounds, though. I mean, for willful infringement, which it probably is easy to show it is, you can get up to $150,000 per infringed work. Though that is for works registered either before the infringement occurred or within 90 days of initial publication. But in a case where a thief is just re-uploading all your new content every time, that's no problem. And also, with copyright cases, you can win attorney's fees too. So it's very possible that you could find an attorney willing to take the case on contingency, where they don't get paid unless they win and then they take a portion of the winnings. Okay, now before I go over the informal dispute process, I can quickly go over that nuclear option I mentioned, which is to have a lawyer send them an actual letter, which is an escalation above just having them submit a DMCA notice on your behalf. There's less for me to say about this because your lawyer would be the one handling it, so you can ask them exactly what would be the best course of action, whether you'd call it a cease and desist letter or a demand letter or something else. Now, I can't really get into any more detail for reasons I can't even get into, but what I will say is that in my experience, TikTok does apparently act lightning fast, potentially within 1 hour, when the proper legal correspondence is delivered to the proper place. Again, I don't want to say more than that because it's all stuff that your lawyer will need to handle. All right, now let's talk about that informal dispute process and how to do that, because it's as clear as mud, but at least it's something you can do yourself. First of all, just realize that it's not a make TikTok do whatever you want process. It's only useful for actual legal claims that you could sue them for. And it's there to protect TikTok by letting them handle claims before it even gets to court. It's not for something like, you banned my account and I want it back. If you can't sue them for it, it's not going to help you. They'll just ignore you. But if, for example, you say something like, and I'm paraphrasing, hey, I filed these DMCA takedowns and you haven't been expeditious in removing the content. You'd better take them down and ban the account or I'm going to sue you. And by the way, the publish date on the original works is well within the 90-day period to register the copyright and seek maximum statutory damages. Well, that is something they certainly would pay attention to. Now, to be clear, the goal should really be that you don't have to sue them. Ideally, they will do what you ask, assuming it's reasonable in their judgment. For example, if it's just one infringing video on someone's account, it's probably not reasonable to demand they ban the entire account. But in a case like mine, where they were continuously uploading my content, TikTok apparently agreed that banning the accounts was reasonable because they did. What I would do in any case is go based off their own policies. For example, if the thief stole a bunch of your videos, you can cite their repeat infringer policy. As for how to start the informal dispute process, The terms of service don't even say explicitly. At the bottom, the only form of contact is the web form and a mailing address, but since the web form link literally says you can contact us with it, I assume that's how they intend for you to do it. And that is what I did, though I sent it to some emails too. I'll get to all that. Now, another thing that's kind of ridiculous is the web form apparently doesn't even have an option for this informal dispute process. It's ridiculous. When I submitted it to get those 2 accounts taken down, I just did general account inquiry other, but that option doesn't even seem to show up all the time. I don't know why. And I recently had to submit a new dispute for the new Thieves, and in this case, I couldn't get that option to show up again, so I just selected change account information other. Yeah, it's the closest one I could find, so maybe try that. Now, they also used to have a special email in their terms specifically for these disputes, and I also emailed that too, so that's probably good to do for good measure, and I can confirm that they do still send at least an automated response to it, so I would probably try emailing that as well. Even though it's not listed in the terms of service as required or whatever, it apparently still works, though I'm not sure if anyone actually still checks it. Definitely do the web form though, that's the actual one listed in the terms of service. The first time I did the dispute notice, I sent it via web form and email and asked them to forward it to their legal department, and literally got repeated canned responses from the support rep asking for my username, which wasn't relevant, but I finally gave it to him. And like 2 weeks later, I get this, another canned response saying to email legal@tiktok.com, which is not even an email address mentioned in the terms of service, but I tried it anyway, and it actually came back that the email address does not exist. Wow, very helpful. So I told them that and basically thought, well, you know what, not my problem. If they don't remove the videos, I'll literally just sue them after 60 days. I mean, I delivered it fair and square and went through great effort to make sure they saw it. And I guess they did, because on October 21st, nearly exactly 30 days after I submitted the dispute on September 22nd, by the way, they went through and actually processed all my takedowns within a 5-minute span and banned the accounts. It's funny that it was just under 30 days. They really took their sweet time. As for why it wasn't 60 days, maybe they didn't want to take the chance that I would have considered their representative's canned response as an actual response, so they did it in 30 days. Now, it could also be a total coincidence and they were just simply taking really long on those older DMCA notices, and it had nothing to do with the dispute notice, but I think the timing is too perfect for that. That being said, if you are willing to send a physical letter of your dispute notice in addition to the web form, that might not be a bad idea. I would probably expect that it would get in front of a decision-making human a lot faster than hoping that the low-level customer service reps forwards it to the right department, assuming that they even comprehend what you're talking about. And I'd probably also send it with tracking and require signature upon delivery, whether that's certified mail or via FedEx or something, just to know that it got there. Now, I did submit a second dispute notice, though I'm not sure how long they would have taken with that, because they already banned that account after I took that other route. But I'll still include the parts where I recorded talking about that before that happened. Now, the second time, once again, I submitted the dispute and got a useless canned response. And this time, the informal dispute email did actually give an automated response. I can't remember if it did the first time, actually. And you might be thinking, all right, well, what if they never respond and never take down the videos? Well, the way I see it, if they don't do it, I will sue them for up to $150K per work infringed. Anyway, for the dispute notice, there's no template, so I basically just described the situation, what my complaints are, and what actions I consider acceptable to resolve the dispute, and what I'd intend to do if it's not resolved. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that you need to have all that. That's just my best guess for what they expect, considering they don't seem to have any official instructions. I'll put parts of what I did on the screen if you want an example, but do not just copy it. It's very specific to my situation. Another thing I've read people on Reddit saying is effective is submitting separate takedowns for at least probably the first few videos, as opposed to all at once initially. Platforms, including TikTok, are supposed to have a repeat infringer policy, it's called, where if someone gets multiple takedown notices, their account is banned. But usually this doesn't kick in if all the videos are on one notice. Now, you might be wondering, do you have to wait until they inevitably ignore your DMCA takedowns to start the dispute process? For my second dispute, I personally chose to submit it right after sending the takedowns because of the circumstances. Specifically, since I believe it's the same person as before, and therefore now they are a repeat infringer, and that all of their accounts should have been technically banned already at this point anyway. But if it's the first time dealing with a particular infringer, I think it's probably best to wait at least 14 days or so before submitting the dispute, but I guess that's up to you. Okay, now let's talk about the DMCA notice itself. And again, I stress that I'm not a lawyer. None of this is legal advice. Copyright law is incredibly complex. Like, there might be case law that I'm not even aware of that completely throws a wrench in what I'm saying, for example. So you should always consider consulting with a legal professional for your own circumstances. This is basically just what I learned doing research for my own situation, but in any case, I hope it should be helpful. Now, every social media platform is going to have some kind of web form for DMCA notices where they require you to put in all of this personal info like name and address, and then also say, oh yeah, by the way, we're gonna give it to the guy who stole your stuff. No thanks. First of all, from what I understand, there's no legal obligation to use their web form at all if you don't want. Every platform has to put a listing on the government site called the DMCA Designated Agent Directory, and it will have the official contact information for where you can send DMCA notices. This should include an official email address for notices, and you might choose to send notices to that instead. Now, to be clear, don't think that this is some secret email you can use to get general support just to get to a human. It's probably still automated. For example, TikTok's still just sends automatic responses with confirmation numbers. Don't waste your time spamming it. But here are some things that no one ever talks about. Maybe because few people take a look at the actual text of the law. But if you do, and it's Title 17, Section 512C3, Elements of Notification, it spells out the requirements for a valid DMCA notice. There are 6 things. 1. A physical or electronic signature. This is what my signature happens to look like, for example, and who am I to tell you what your signature looks like? I just drew it out with the mouse with the drawing app, screenshotted it, and embedded it by just pasting it. And for good measure, I always do a unique signature for every single individual notice. Next, number 2 required is identification of the copyrighted works claimed to have been infringed. For this, I simply put links to my original YouTube videos and their titles, and then labeled it as the original source, for example. 3, identification of the material that is claimed to be infringing. Basically, include a list of the stolen videos on the Thieves account. 4, information reasonably sufficient to permit the service provider to contact the complaining party. Now, read this one closely. It says, such as address, telephone, etc. These are possible examples. It does not say including or say that they are all required. At least one article I read agreed with my personal interpretation that theoretically even just an email could suffice. Though for good measure, I have been including both my email address and a Google Voice phone number. 5, you need a statement saying that you have a good faith belief the material is infringing, and 6, a statement under perjury that everything you say is accurate and you're authorized. For these 2, I just went with how they appear in a sample notice published by the US Copyright Office. Can't really go wrong with that. And notice that nowhere in the elements of notification is the word name even mentioned. However, this actually makes sense. You can literally register copyrights with the government under a pseudonym or anonymously. So it makes sense that you should be able to enforce that right of those registrations in the same manner if you wanted. Now, let's be pragmatic here though. If you send a DMCA notice without your name and stuff, even though it might technically be valid under the law, I guarantee these platforms are probably going to push back on them. It probably is faster and more reliable if you hire a lawyer to submit the takedown for you on your behalf. And again, they would not need to put your actual name. They would just put their own law firm information. Now, one more thing that's really important here is this next clause, which talks about notices that have mistakes or are deficient in some way. It basically says that if your DMCA notice isn't perfect, but it does at least contain identification of the infringing work, your work being infringed, and a method of contact, that the service provider must still respond promptly to assist you in getting the notice compliant. So that's good to know, especially if the platform just completely ignores your notice, because if you had at least those 3 things, they can't even argue, well, the notice didn't have this other thing, or we didn't think it was valid, blah, blah, blah. No, if they were going to say that, they would have had to respond to you promptly and say that. So to be sure your notice is as robust as possible, here are some tips to consider. Believe it or not, there is actually one more requirement for filing a DMCA takedown that is not written in the law. In the case of Lentz vs. Universal, the courts ruled that a claimant, that's you, must consider whether the content is fair use before filing a takedown. You aren't required to include that in the notice for it to be valid, from my understanding, but I think if the whole thing went to court, they would almost certainly ask you whether you did consider fair use. So what I've been doing, even though it's not required, is include a full fair use analysis, completely deconstructing any possible fair use defense in this case. And no, I did not use AI for this, and no, it's not just lip service. I literally articulated exactly why it's not fair use. What I did is definitely overkill, detail, but my thinking is basically to literally prove you truly considered fair use. If you decide to include something like this, you can put whatever you want. Obviously, don't just copy what I put though. You can see it's very specific to my situation, and I usually actually change it for each individual notice. Another tip, again, even though it's not required by the text of the law, I definitely think it's best if you give evidence, or better yet, proof, that you are authorized in some way, even if just to make things go faster. Because even on TikTok's web form, for example, they do request evidence of authority. If you have an email on your own domain name, like me, and you send the notice from that, make sure that that domain is linked from your official YouTube channel, and then you can mention that and say, look, the original source video on the channel has this official domain, and that's where I'm emailing from. I also started putting my actual domain name literally in the video itself at the end next to the copyright notice, which I'll get to in a second. That way I can say in the notice, look, you can literally see my domain name I'm emailing from in the stolen video. There's your proof. You could also put an official contact, email address, or whatever, or even just your official YouTube channel link, something like that. The idea is to have an actual chain of custody affixed within the video itself to show that your method of contact is associated with the work. Now, if you're thinking, well, they'll just cut that off or cover it up, but just wait, I'll come back to that. Next, I would strongly consider putting what's called a copyright notice at the end of the video somewhere, as well as other info like your domain name if you have one. Copyright notices, which is the name for this kind of thing with the block of text with the copyright symbol, a name, and a year, are not actually required for copyright protection. But if your work has one, it makes it impossible for someone to claim innocent infringement. That is literally written in the law. And that basically means you're guaranteed higher damages. The law talks about what counts as a valid copyright notice, but basically it's just that C symbol, the year of publication, and you need a name. For the name, it can be your name or a company name or abbreviation of those, but it also says a generally known alternative designation. Now, again, do not take this as legal advice, but I personally just put my YouTube channel name because that's truly the generally known name that the works are published under. In my opinion, that's literally the name that makes the most sense to put. I don't actually know if it is valid, to be honest, though, so actually ask a lawyer. And to just ignore this alternate designation label, that's just a thing I came up with for added clarity. It's not based in law. I'm probably overthinking it. All that being said, since copyright notices are not required anyway, I think simply having one, regardless of the technicalities of the names, is still enough to prove that it wasn't innocent infringement. Again, talk to a lawyer about that, though. I could be wrong. Now, another thing is, I read that some courts have surprisingly decided that if a defendant is sufficiently unsophisticated, that even having a copyright notice might not be enough, which in my interpretation means they said that someone might be so incredibly stupid that they don't even understand that something is copyrighted even with the notice. So I also added this block of text explicitly stating that reposting the video is copyright infringement, so I can't imagine there would be any possible defense. Okay, now what if they just remove the copyright notice and stuff? Well, they could, but it would be really stupid. First of all, it would further prove that the stolen version is not the original anyway, and that it's obvious they removed that part intentionally. But also, let's take a look at this little known part of the DMCA addressing that. Section 1202B, removal or alteration of copyright management information. It has a list of what counts as copyright management information, and it's pretty general, but it definitely includes anything in the copyright notice that we talked about, but then also stuff like the title of the work, identifying info about the author, terms and conditions, and even this one, identifying numbers or symbols referring to such information or links to such information. So I'm fairly certain that includes stuff like an official domain name, and also maybe an ISBN for books, a registration number, even the source YouTube channel link, stuff like that. Basically, I think anything meant to help identify the author or the owner. And from my understanding, this includes any watermark that you include anywhere in the video. It doesn't need to be just the copyright notice or next to it. So if you have a watermark throughout your entire video and someone covers it up, that would count as removing it too. So what if they do remove or alter the copyright management information? Well, that is described in the Civil Remedies section, 1203(3)(b). And the statutory damages for that are a minimum of $2,500 all the way up to $25,000 for each violation, not just per infringed work. Also, from my understanding, to get this, you don't even need to have registered the copyright before the violation occurred or within that 90 days of publishing. So that's good to know in general and might make you want to watermark everything you create. And now, putting all of this together for your future videos, you can have information in there that makes it way easier to submit takedowns and prove your association. And again, even for the past videos, you can still do the thing where you put a link from your official YouTube channel to the domain, stuff like that. Now, this section is probably only going to be of interest to lawyers, but I'd be curious about your thoughts. You see, while waiting for TikTok to respond to my first informal dispute notice, out of curiosity, I looked up what kind of copyright lawsuits against TikTok there already were. In a recent one of the arguments that TikTok was making was to defend against vicarious copyright infringement, and specifically against the idea that the infringing work in that case acted as a draw to the platform. And they cited case law where the court said a plaintiff must show that customers either subscribed because of the available infringing material or canceled subscriptions because it was no longer available. That was from a case Perfect 10 versus Giga News Inc., which was actually quoting another case, Ellison versus Robertson, and that will be relevant. Now, I have some thoughts on the entire premise of that argument that you have to prove they subscribed or canceled, because first of all, in the Giga News case and the Robertson case that quote comes from, both of those were dealing with paid-only services, Giga News and AOL, respectively. Those services only make money from subscriptions. So in that context, the argument might make sense, but on a free social media site where they don't get a flat fee regardless of usage or consumption of content, but rather the platform makes more money with more consumption of content, I'm not sure that argument should even apply. Now, as for the idea of whether or not content acts as a draw, which again, TikTok was trying to show that it wasn't, I think in any case, you really have to think about it differently when it comes to social media. And it really has nothing to do with whether they joined TikTok or anything, but rather how much they used TikTok based on the infringing content. I mean, first, it would be easy to find out if any viewers followed the uploaders' accounts while watching the infringing video. Like in my case, the accounts were exclusively uploading my content. It was ridiculous. Otherwise, I'm guessing if the content was amongst a bunch of other stuff, the interaction statistics could be obtained during discovery or something. So that might also include likes and comments, for example. And I would think that if a user follows an account uploading infringing content, well, I mean, that's an explicit action that they want to interact with more of that account, and therefore also the platform as a whole, as a direct result of the infringing content. Throw on top the fact that many platforms like TikTok may send out emails and stuff to notify users when the accounts they follow uploads new content. There might even be comments like these from users on the infringing videos where they express interest explicitly in seeing more content from the infringer. These are real examples from my situation, which made me think of that. And I also know that when I was keeping track of the accounts stealing my own content, it would sometimes put more of their stolen videos in my For You feed, so there's probably an argument to be made related to that. Anyway, going back to more of the stuff I was reading, next TikTok had a whole section basically arguing against the idea that TikTok even made indirect profits from advertising revenue. Now, I would think that it's obvious that TikTok benefits and makes money when some stolen content gets a ton of views, for example, but I guess it's hard to explicitly prove it. I do wonder if it could be argued that user interaction itself can be monetized. I mean, that would be tricky. Oh wait, actually TikTok literally says that on their own page called Ads in Your Data. How convenient. And wow, look at this. The terms of service even say that by using the service, they may generate revenues, increase goodwill, or otherwise increase our value, including usage data. And then there's this quote from TikTok's 25 compliance overview, where they say that we believe advertising is rightly considered an integrated part of the TikTok online social networking service and not provided separately. But wait, because we're still talking in generalizations here. What if we want actual numbers to point to prove without any doubt that there was some kind of concrete increase in revenue, even if it was just a penny? Could such thing be possible? Well, it got me thinking, every social media site is probably going to have some kind of content or advertising profile for every user. And by profile, I mean like behind the scenes, a bunch of data about what the user prefers to interact with, like their likely interests, and what kind of ad topics the system should show them, stuff like that. There's also a lot of data that social media platforms inherently store for certain features, like which users liked a given post or followed an account, and probably which video they were watching when they did that, or even how long they watched a video, stuff like that. So I would imagine that if you looked at the advertising profiles of the users, there'd probably be signs or even direct proof that the user's profile changed as a result of that particular infringing content. Like maybe there's some kind of tag or reference that is next to one of the user interests, which I don't know, could link to some interaction with that content as the reason for it being there, stuff like that. And it seems to me that with the addition of such a new known interest to that user, and then subsequent displayed ads as a result of that interest, regardless of when and where the advertisement is placed, well, there could be a convincing argument to be made about whether or not the money earned from those ads is directly from the infringing content or not. Or depending on the platform, there might be some kind of value coefficient assigned to each user for how much they're worth to advertisers, and there might be signs that after they watched or interacted with some kind of content that the value went up. I believe the term for this is value metrics, or I think some other terms in the same neighborhood as that are like audience segments and audience segmentation. That's like a bunch of users packaged together to sell to advertisers based on different interests. I think I've also seen that be called lookalike audiences and lookalike segments, for example. Anyway, that's just a bunch of stuff that got me thinking. All right, so this whole video ended up being way longer than I imagined, but hopefully now you should feel way more confident in exercising your rights to your content against thieves who just steal it. Let me know what you think. Send this to any creators you come across who are having their content stolen if they're not aware of this, and I think we can really put an end to this crap. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a big giant thumbs up. It helps out. If you want to keep watching, next up, I'd recommend this video where I talked about new scams this year. It's always good to know. I'll put that link right there and click on. And if you want to subscribe, I try to make videos about twice a week, so it should be worth it. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.